Yeah, I'm currently based in Lisbon, Portugal, and I'm product ops lead at OLX Group, the motors part in Europe. My background is from a design background, and over the years, I started digging into more service design, and design thinking and user experience design. And it reached a point where I wanted to start looking at how teams grow, how teams develop, and their structure and their infrastructures to be able to work and their processes. And then I went into the role of more design ops and design practices. And then at Farfetch, it was almost a natural thing. We were doing design, we were doing practice work there, working on the design team. And then it kind of happened where we pulled into product operations. So because they felt they wanted that in the product area. And that's basically how I got into it. And it's been an interesting challenge since then, bringing some of my design background into product operations, but looking at it and learning also about the whole product area a bit more than what I already knew, even though I've worked in the product area for quite a while. So that's me.
Yeah, great. Well, nice to meet. Great to be here today. And yeah, so I guess what really brought me to product operations is over the last 20 years or so, I've done a lot of different types of product management roles. I've dabbled a bit in business development as well, and you can see all the logos that are up there. But what I think I started realizing over time, right? So the first book I ever bought on Amazon was Extreme Programming back in 1999. And that whole journey and idea of how do we start to redistribute power within the organization to better understand and better build things that are actually valuable to customers is something that I've, you started to see with something like DevOps. You started to see it with even things like research and design ops. And then finally, this idea of like, how do we do a better job as product managers together within a team is something that I've been thinking about a lot for the last, say, 5 or 6 years. I've written some articles about how to do critiques of product management work. And that's then turned into that whenever I've been a manager on a team or been part of a team, I try to figure out like what are the right ways for us to improve our work as a group. And a large part of that is because of individuals. Product managers are usually on a cross-functional team by themselves. And so I started to see that as like a real value. And so I've done, I think, what would be considered product ops work for a while at a couple different roles. But this is really the first time now that I'm in Cognizant as the head of product operations for our enterprise engineering product management community, where I've had my incentives aligned with the work that I was actually doing. And so that's, I think, what's really valuable or important about product operations. And anyway, so my community is, I'm a steward for a community of about 100 product managers and product analysts. I end up also helping coach and teach the way to do OKRs for an organization that's about 15,000 people. And then I guess I'm kind of the unofficial holder of the product mindset at Cognizant because I'm constantly doing workshops and teaching. And part of this, like maybe that's like something we should get into as well, is just, I end up working on a lot of things that help salespeople or account managers or architects or engineering managers because Cognizant is a very delivery-oriented organization, very much about execution. And, we're usually hired like we need 10 bodies to go and build this thing, right? And so for us as a organization, we need to improve our positioning with our clients to be more strategic. And so to be able to do that, we need to have product management be a key component of that. And it's fallen on product operations to help drive that transition or kind of transformation for a lot of our own internal organizations. So that's kind of my background when it comes to getting to product operations.
Cool. Very interesting. So exciting to be here as well. So my name is Becky Flint. I'm currently the founder and CEO of Dragonboat. So as Baji mentioned earlier, we're actually a platform sort of built for product ops and product operations. And my background, similar to Chris, that have done a number of things, definitely product management, a little bit engineering management, was a little bit of startup founder, back in the 1990s something, dating myself. But one of the interesting thing, I got into product ops before I was even known as a product ops. And, really my exposure to product ops was when I joined PayPal when it was in the early 2000s. And I didn't buy the book. When I started, I had a book on my desk. It's called a New Country Launch Playbook. And that was really a playbook that was written by the product ops, the first product ops at PayPal, really help us to figure out how do you take a product. It feels simple, but really is very, very complex to a new country that has the legal compliance, you name it, basically every single function of the company basically would have a new flavor for that for the country to legally exist, right? So actually it's funny that, later on we found out that some of the other product ops, newer generation product ops company like Uber's and Airbnb, they started with the country launch and it really realized that just the product is not enough. Someone had to do it across all areas to launch a product in different countries. That's sort of the product ops. So anyway, I started at PayPal as the role didn't call it product ops, but it was kind of like a product ops, and then we built and scaled, and later on built, portfolio management for PayPal, and then later on went to a couple more companies and Shutterfly and so on to really build product portfolio management, strategy ops, and the product ops along the way. So the journey to where we are today is to really realize the practice varies in flavor, but the essence is very similar. Going back to extreme programming or agile, that it is practiced in a way somewhat consistent, but also different in company from company to company. So excited to be here and having more of a chat with everyone to know. Sounds like we have a lot of different journeys where we are. So so I guess, we kind of touched upon it a little bit. I would love to hear your thoughts and improvement, the evolution of your understanding of product ops, maybe in your various roles, and how does it look like in terms of a success?
You want to go first, Chris? I can go, I guess. It's kind of funny because I coming from Farfetch, where we had built up a team of 4, across the whole product org. We had the support, we were creating an infrastructure, and it was great. And we had things pretty much defined, but it was a very big organization. And now I moved over into OLX Group, and it brings new challenges because now I am suddenly that team of 1 again. Here what happens is I'm basically defining what is the product ops scope, what is the definition, what are the principles, how do we work, So it was very important defining that, and setting the baseline of what is the expectation, what it isn't, sort of telling people, okay, let's say, for example, I like to use the example of tooling, right? As soon as I arrived, everybody wants to throw tooling onto me. Oh, we're going to do this and that. And I turned around and I said, look, let's be honest, I'm going to look at the tool set, that maybe the product managers have and the product team has, but I'm not going to do licensing. I'm not going to manage the things like that. I'm not going to go down to the details. That's the procurement team. And it's almost setting those, those parameters, like, I'm not going to be worried about that because I think it's about empowering the team, right? It's about empowering the product team to do their best work. And that's what I want to do. So the thing is, it's trying to find those areas where you need improvement, where you need to make them feel more supported and create that infrastructure so they can do their best work. We started looking at OKRs, Chris, you talked about OKRs. I read some of your articles as support as well, and we started looking at that and saying, okay, but how can we do this properly? Make sure it's driving, change, and also looking at the decision-making process, looking at all of these parts, So we're starting to create here the infrastructure to then build up, but again, never to the point where it's over, it's too much process, to the point where it's not adaptive or agile, going back to what you were saying, Becky, it's keeping it constantly where it can move and change if need be. And if we find new things, we can organically adapt to that. And it's still the beginning of this journey, but so far it's been super interesting, and it's only been 2.5 months. So.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like getting started inside of this role, I joined in March of last year. And so, there's a lot, whenever you come into an organization that already has a lot of product managers, or just in general has like a lot of people working on something, there's already processes that are in place, and not just from the standpoint of like corporation processes, right? Cognizant is an organization of 300,000 people worldwide. And so you could imagine there's lots of process that is involved in managing a organization that size. And so, unfortunately, I did get caught into dealing with procurement and administration of certain tools, which is very hard in a very large organization, because the procurement team has a lot of very rigid processes because of kind of past problems that they've perceived. So it doesn't allow us to be as flexible as we want. But there's a lot about, I think, when you first come in as a product operations person, that I think the first inclination is to come in and try to build process that makes more sense. When the reality is taking a step back and looking at the goals of processes that are there to then destroy the process is really the ideal thing. And so I wrote a post about this on the Product-Led Alliance about how I believe product operations is about creative destruction. But I think that is really true, right? Like, and the story I cite in a couple different places was this idea that, you know, coming in and we had a meeting called the council meeting, which is essentially where PMs that are on projects, right? If people are not familiar with Cognizant, we're a consulting practice. And so all the PMs will be on individual projects for clients as product managers. And so we used to do something where they would have to prepare this like very large slide deck. They'd have to then present this slide deck during a meeting, and there would be no room for discussion. And so one of the first things I did was, well, one, I talked to like everybody on the team, which, you know, I didn't get to all 100 product managers and analysts, but almost. I would sit in all the different regular meetings that were already scheduled. And one of the things that I just found was that this meeting was causing a lot of pain for product managers, right? It was something that they spent too much time on, they didn't see the effects of it. And then even the goals that we had were not being like actually in some way met based on this meeting. And so blowing up that format of the meeting and redefining what it meant, and we did this through kind of a series of experiments with certain meetings, seeing and retroing what that meant, and then rolling that out to the entire organization eventually, was really about that orientation that, you know, my customer is now the product manager, not the end customer, right? Even the client that we deal with, where, you know, the supreme kind of thing that we need to do is to always make our client happy. I actually don't care, you know, between all of us product ops people, I don't care about that anymore. And so, again, I think this is like a key thing. And, you know, I think there's like some good discussion to happen within the product ops community, because I've seen also other people believe that they still need to worry about the end customer. And I think this gets back to, you know, Setting the Table is a really great book about kind of hospitality in general. And, you know, the author, you know, who basically, I'm blanking on his name right now, I feel really bad about that, but he basically talks about the way that he does prioritization of people, and he puts his employees at the top. He puts, I think it's employees, vendors, customers, and then shareholders, right? And so I think like when I put this together personally, I think of it as like product managers, product partners, so that like engineering, architecture, whatever those people are, then management, then our clients, then management. And so I think like having that type of prioritization, I think is, it's Danny Myers who wrote that book, really great restaurateur. But I think that's like a really important way for us to orient the product ops team so that we're doing exactly what you were saying, which is like, we're building a better practice for people to feel like good. And you know, like one of my OKRs is really just about like making the product management community inside of Cognizant the gold standard for product management, right? And that's a very lofty objective. The KRs that we start to look at are like, how much time are people spending with the community? What is their kind of like, I hate NPS, but like their satisfaction score with regards to the community? How are we doing things like dealing with attrition and retention? And so I think if you want to like talk about that, that's how I think about kind of like turning this into a system that is actually tracked in some way, but also is about like, how good of a community do we have for product managers? And so that's really, I think, the journey that I've gone on, even just over the last year, where this has been my title, whereas I was not doing it as like a side job as a manager before.
Right. I totally hear what you're saying. Definitely product ops have lots of stakeholders. Product manager obviously is day in and day out, they work with you. In some ways, they're almost like your team, even though they don't report to you, right? And that's like in many companies where when there was no product ops, the VP product, head of product basically play that role, right? You do product, you do ops. That's the product ops. When you have big enough team that if you do too much ops, nobody's gonna lead the product strategy and all that stuff. So then you split the role, you have product and ops. And that's really
we still have an ops team, right? Like we have a huge the ops team that deals with allocation. Yeah.
Right. What I'm trying to talk about is like, one of the things that, we realized is that a lot of times people say, hey, product ops, it's a new role, it's a new function, and it's now, but it's not really true, right? It's like everyone is, you can't talk about any function, right? When you had sales ops, revenue ops, they're basically before you have revenue ops and sales ops, the head of the sales play that role. And then they're like, they don't have time enough, they have to scale, they have to take one of the head out. And then there's the sales ops role came into play, and now everyone know what they do, right? Same thing for engineering ops, the same thing, the head of engineering doing that, and then later on they put someone else. And same thing for product, right? Since day one, like as a single product manager, that person play a head of the product, right? Product ops and a product manager, maybe designer at the same time. So, and from that perspective, I think it's totally true where the stakeholders in terms of product managers is huge because they're part of the team working with them day in and day out. It's interesting you talk about customers. I would think a product manager has customers, and then there are internal people, the business teams, the revenue teams, the customer success teams, because ultimately product team would get their input and also collaborate with them, right? And also build a product for customers externally, and also make sure that we deliver outcomes that support our other functions. Right. So like, I think it's a very interesting where the NPS score that I think is something where, when we started at PayPal, we had the function what we were doing, we called it product program manager versus technical program manager, because that's basically product ops, right? And what we really struggle on, how do we know we've done a good job? What is our measure? We spent probably a good 10 years, multiple iterations on, is it, make sure product managers are successful, make sure they get the things they need to get, they get the support they need to get, make sure the operation, the process is efficient so that we don't have too many meetings or whatnot, or is make sure that, our different, as the growing business, you have, not only you have different functions, the marketing, sales, and all that functions, they support, interact with the product organization in some form of fashion, also engineering, as well as we have a different business unit, and we have basic markets, right? You have different markets, so how do these people, they're like rely on product as well. So then we expand it to that group as well. And then ultimately, as the company grow from kind of product, still more like a product engineering as a kind of group, to really integrate it, especially for product centric and product led companies, where product is an element of the whole realm. And sometimes that, I think ultimately we realize that the product ops for at least for the companies that I've been through, and the PayPal were like our final iterations, so to speak. Well, final is like by the time I left, it's 9 years later, is that the outcome the product team can create, not just the outcome for today, not this feature, this release, not the outcome just for customer, but also for the markets, the regions, and cross. You don't over-index in North America. Obviously, North America makes the most money, but if you don't invest in, EMEA and LATAM, then there's no play, right? The company won't have a future. So I think ultimately what we did was like every role, we had a scorecard with the scorecards, and then we have to say, as the stakeholders across the board, where are we with product community, our product teams? Where are we with our engineering community and teams? Where are we with the supports and marketing others and the business teams? And then we don't just add up something, give you a number, and then it's like 90 or whatever, because it doesn't tell us anything, right? So we actually look at the score by different areas. And I say, oh, okay, so we did a good job with the product teams, but not great job with engineering, or not great job with the market. Then we adjust that, right? So I think that sort of the ultimate priority kind of changes as the time goes on. Sometimes we did really good job with the market and everything, but engineering is killed, right? So engineering say, okay, we don't have a good requirements, and then we like rushing things through. We have a lot of bugs. We didn't take care of tech debt. And sometimes it's like, okay, engineering is good. We really move up the score, but then the regions having problems because nothing happening. They're losing, those kind of scorecards internally also help us to say where we need to kind of dial back and up and kind of change our focuses. So do you guys have something similar to that as well?
Yeah, I don't have it at the moment, but I was looking at exactly that, and I was actually taking from hold on a sec, let me just get this right, the Kirkpatrick evaluation model that is used for training effectiveness. And I was looking at the 3 levels and seeing if it couldn't be adapted here, or the 4 levels, sorry. So the first level is around NPS scores, right? It's like you're saying, sentiment scores, seeing how they're feeling on different parts. And this can be done, as soon as you finish any type of project or change or whatever. Then there's the second level. This one I'm not sure how to adapt, but it's around a quiz, right? So you actually ask a quiz to see what did they extract from that process, right? Did they learn anything? Did they evolve in that sense? Then you start measuring the behavior. And this is done more in a 3 to 6 month period. You start seeing if their behavior is changing, if there's a model change. And then the last one is around the actual reaction, and that's the impact around the company. And so you start looking at, is the product org changing because of what you've done, right? Can you start seeing that? And so it goes almost from a quantitative to qualitative, but it sort of gives you the step ladder. And I've been trying to look at how I can adapt this maybe to this model. So that's what I'm looking at the moment. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like a really important aspect of when we think about these systems, and I had a very visceral reaction to the post that was on PLA about like Taylorism and product operations. So I may or may not.
Kudos to Bruno, ex-colleague.
Yeah, yes.
Great article. I love that.
I am maybe or maybe not writing a response to that article because of the idea of Taylorism makes me like this, like it made me angry, first of all, to hear the word Taylorism used with product operations. But again, like I have the utmost respect for every product ops person out there. So I will figure out how to navigate this in a way that is interesting and helpful. But yeah, I think like this idea of, are we talking about it as a system that can be established and the rules are known, right? Or are we talking about a system that is highly complex, that involves lots of different types of organizations inside of our organization? And I think it's more the latter than the former, but I think there's room for both of those things, right? Like, and this is maybe something I've been thinking about, the difference between just like project management and product management is this idea of product management being a lot about embracing the uncertainty of the world, whereas project management is about how do you build safe environments for software development, right? And those are 2 very different things that need to happen. And so, I don't know, it's interesting because then in the product ops world, the way I've usually approached this is like, when I first got to Cognizant, it was starting to map out all of the different cause and effects that we're starting to see that are in some way impacting each other and creating kind of loops or flywheels. And so the biggest problem for us was, we were being put on projects that were not ideal for product managers. They were more like Scrum Masters or user story writers or horrible titles like that inside of clients. We were not getting the bill rates that we wanted. People were not getting trained up to the levels that we thought they should be. And so there was like inconsistency in leveling, things like that, right? And so all of these things end up being interconnected. And it's not like I can institute one policy as a product ops person that will just fix all that stuff. Or even multiple policies, right? And I don't even know what would be a policy I could implement that would fix all those things, right? And so it's more about this idea of like, from a complex adaptive system thinking point of view, is this idea of interventions inside of the systems or probes or, and when I say probe, I mean from the standpoint of like Cynefin, like Dave Snowden complexity theory, is that you're like making small interventions into the system to see whether it improves a little bit. And those things all snowball together to become better and better overall. And so that's I think this idea of like, what are the things that we need to make safe, right? So, and when I say safe, like we need to check the boxes that like legal was talked to before this thing was released, right? Versus this idea of like, well, we want to have as much kind of ability to be resilient and robust and adaptive of these teams. And so, maybe a good example of this is that whenever I've read through all of these like handbooks or playbooks for product management, there's usually one page that talks about communication, right? And that communication is like, we do it this way, the SLA is this, we use Slack for these things, we use email for these things, blah, 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 right? And what I saw when I came into this community was that there wasn't really an issue about communication. Like there were a few ways that we communicated as a community, but it was kind of known. And then for the most part, people were on client teams. And so it was whatever those client teams wanted to do as far as communication. So actually writing some type of process around what are our standards for communication didn't make sense because it wasn't going to help anybody. It was just going to create more process for the process sake. And so I think that's where I'm coming from when it comes to a lot of this stuff too, is like, how do we understand or at least start to map out this complex system, which involves all of the people that both of you are talking about, right? It involves all these partner teams, it involves all of these different groups. And so, I mean, that's why that Venn diagram of like product management is always like the least helpful Venn diagram now. And I hate the fact that whenever someone creates a new role, they create a new Venn diagram. It's like the worst way to explain what you're doing is a Venn diagram. And so like, it's actually many different things when it comes to product management. But the reality is like every other role too, because every other role in a cross-functional team is working together, right? And so that's why I just think like it's maybe an unhelpful simplification of what we do. But it is about like dealing, not only like working with and stewarding the community of practice for product managers, but it's now making sure that there's not frictions or problems with other people. And that could be both from the standpoint of embracing uncertainty, as well as building better, safer systems as well. So.
Yeah, I think that you're right, where when you really think about it, every function today, regardless of sales, marketing, product engineering, there are hugely cross-functional and lots of communication and collaboration across and turn and up and down, right? So, and every function, the Venn diagram really is just you have a ball with everything interconnected. You just turn to the ones that your viewpoint, and then you think it's go out. But for the other person, look at a different side of the same connected ball, and that person's viewpoints connect out. I think that totally is really where it's interesting, where a lot of people tend to think that if I'm a product manager, I'm a more sort of collaborative. But if you think about the same as the sales, like sales can't sell anything if it's not there. They don't have a like same as the marketing. Like every function is, and the product ops obviously is also very cross-functional. Now, actually, that leads to a good question. I think if we just an audience question about sort of product ops and a product manager. What are the not really roles and responsibilities? Every company is slightly different. But what are the boundaries and the focuses in your experiences to working out well? When it became sort of not great, when these boundaries are crossed, right? So there's definitely P2s that you kind of more overlap. What are the boundaries you think that it should be fairly cleanly defined once you have that role versus a product manager and product ops?
It's kind of funny, but anybody who's heard one of the team members from Farfetch, where I used to work, we all say it in a simple way. It's focusing on the how rather than the what, right? So it's focusing on how the team works, on how the team responds, on how the team makes decisions. It's a lot on the how, on how we build the product. Whereas with the product managers, they're focusing on the what, right? What is the product you're building? What is the problems you're solving? And it's focusing a lot on that. And that's how I create that distance between the two. And even earlier today, I was talking to someone who was thinking about implementing some ops roles in the company. And I told him, look, the truth of the matter is you're going to have to negotiate, because there are people doing those ops roles. And now you have to negotiate that to take that away from them, because there is that overlap. And now suddenly you won't be able to have that overlap. So I think I like to keep it in that simple way, right? Because it's very simple. If someone comes up to me and asks me, oh, look, I'm having this problem with the product and everything like that, or the customer, and I'm like, okay, how would you solve that problem? And I can guide them through that problem, but I won't tell them, do this with the product. That's the head of product, the director of product, that will give them that guidance, not me per se.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the boundaries are really interesting. I mean, I think anything that, I think this is also maybe an unpopular opinion around, like, I believe product management has been very much like a glue type of role a lot of the time. And I do think that product operations is also a glue role in the sense we're constantly, it's amorphous and renegotiated all the time, right? And I think that's something that happens with a lot of roles that are focused on uncertainty. I think if you can write down 100% of the job requirements or specific things that a product ops person would do, you're probably like boxing yourself into a place that doesn't allow you to now adapt to the circumstances. And so I think some of the key things that I think the boundary that is most concerning to me is when it turns into, basically bullshit work. And so from the standpoint of product ops is not there to do the job that product managers do not want to do. Right? That's not what we're here for. And I think that there's borderline cases where that starts to happen. And so maybe like, how do you identify that? Like, I tell the story about how when I was a program manager at Microsoft, which basically is like product management with a little bit of like Gantt charts, right, involved. And this was like a long time ago too. But like, we would joke that my job was to get the engineers sodas when they were staying late. right? Or order pizza for them. And it was half joking because I actually had to do that as well as stick around. And like, what was my job to be there was just like hang out. Like I didn't do anything other than like soldiering essentially for the fact that everybody else was there late because they were trying to meet some deadline. And I had to answer a question occasionally. So I think like, you know, the part around product ops being helpful, right, is that we want to make sure that people don't make the same mistakes multiple times. We want to make sure that they're not getting caught up in like the bureaucracy of the system, or that they're, you know, doing something over and over again that is in some way causing them extra pain or work. And right, that's why I think a lot of like early product ops, like the idea of Pendo or Melissa Perry focusing on things like collecting qualitative and quantitative results somewhere, is because they didn't have great partners in those companies that were data scientists or user researchers, right? And so I think that's the thing, is like we need to adapt to whatever the problems are and making people most effective as product managers. And that will usually be things that I think are related to like inside of Cognizant, a lot of the stuff that I've been trying, that has been like the highest priority recently, has been how do we thread all of the competencies and levels for product managers, which by the way, I actually think the competencies and levels for product managers should be the same for product operations. We just replace customer with PM in every one of those places, basically. So that's one thing that I'll say out there, but like the way that we thread that through recruiting and interviewing, performance evaluation, giving feedback, promotion, and then also the idea of like enablement and training, trying to standardize that so that people understand across the board, like how are these things involving all of these different stages of their career within Cognizant, is like a very high priority, right? And so, but what things are not a priority is like, you know, user research is kind of nascent. So yes, I'm trying to teach people to do a better job at that, but they don't do a lot of it inside their clients. Like, and if they do, usually they're working with a designer or a researcher. And so that idea of like collecting all of the research somewhere is just not as valuable to our team. So yeah,
Right.
I mean, I think there is a line, definitely. And it's when a product manager is like, I just don't feel like formatting this document. Hey, product ops person, can you help me format this document? Which in design ops is probably the same thing. Design ops is like, can you help me reformat this slide deck? Like, no, I will not help you do that. And so that's what I think we need.
Yeah, totally. Product ops is not a team admin, right? So that's just putting like really bluntly, you know, I'm not here to take meeting notes. I'm not scheduling meetings for you, and I'm not gonna. You guys not talking, I'm not going to go there. But sometimes when people are not talking, we kind of help out as well, right? So ultimately, you know, you think about it, product ops is kind of like the enablers. I think, house and the careers and process, all that stuff. And because they're really thinking about the categories of things, it's like, okay, how do I enable people? How do I enable the process? How do I enable the technology and systems and platforms? So that's like underlying stuff. And I think that it's interesting where once you have a product ops, the first things you do is the people everyone in the product organization come to you to ask for random stuff, right? And then the next thing you know is everyone in the company come to you, ask for random stuff related to product. Now, I think in some ways, the product ops do play a role, almost you think about it, either traffic cop or like sort of the orchestra person, right? So first of all, people, especially when you have product organizations start to get bigger, there's internal facing thing. You know, what's our cadences? Where the product teams are having challenges and doing really well, which team does well in one area as the others. So that's definitely something. So just enable the team to be effective and performant and better. The second part of that is really like in a way where nobody, like product ops really in this unique role, I don't think we talk enough about it, is product managers focus on their areas, the goals, their areas, the customers, their areas, the product, their areas, and their own universe connect to the others, but not so much as like connect to the other product managers. So there's a big part of the product manager, product team. Like I'm not saying product team is a vertical full stack team. We're thinking about like you have a director, have a bunch of product managers, have a director or VPs, and they are kind of their little kingdoms, right? So sometimes we're joking like they're the kayakers, get on the same boat in a way, because that's what Dragonboat came through. But the point is that modern product are not built in a way that's done by one team. If you kind of not thinking across the portfolio, then there's a big challenge in terms of, we call it an org chart on your product, right? So you can clearly see there are org charts on the product because there are different focus about different areas, and that just, it's become not acceptable in today's world where it's product centric and user experience centric and all that. So I think that part, I wish we hear more, because that's sort of like a phase 3 at PayPal, is really go from enable product team, like country launch, obviously, product team has to launch the country. Who's going to do that? And, then we take that best practice into the others. And then once we get to the second level, we realize we start to have this org chart focus, right? So the checkout teams, focusing on conversion, and then the risk team focus on fraud. But conversions depend on fraud. Fraud is affecting conversion. So who's going to look at them together and then say, okay, we create the frameworks and the rules to help us as a portfolio to say, okay, you cannot dial up your rules on the risk to decline too much transactions so that you don't have a high level of conversion, you overall lose revenue. Or you don't want to lax it so much so that you have a lot of conversion, but the fraudster coming through that has, both impact on our own business and the impact on actually customers. So the product ops now really became like the third level, is to say, how do we see across the portfolio? And then kind of like to say, what really matter, who are not only our core areas of focus, what's our pair of factors. And I think it's interesting because I'm not sure. So Marty Kagan in his book about having sort of empower teams, you own goals, and then one of them is about that you don't own just one goal. You own multiple metrics. They're actually, competing. And that's like, obviously he came from eBay, which is PayPal. We kind of have similar concept, same family, right? And it's really like, I think one of the customer I was advising a while back, right before, well, actually was the time I started Dragonboat, was that we're going through a strategic planning process, and they're saying we have, 300 items to prioritize. How do we prioritize them, right? Like, what kind of prioritization method should you use? And
just delete all of them.
There you go backwards, right? So ultimately I have them turn around to say, hey, you know what? You really should think about like, what are the problems that are the most important that's affecting you through all these things out of the way, right? So talk about the problems, like what's the organization, what the problem you care. So end up everyone like at the executive and VPs and director level, they all care slightly different problem. So then we have to align their, what the problems they care the most. So they pick up top 5 problems, right? The areas, and then we figure out how much you really care in terms of put your money where your strategy is, which is resources, right? So then we kind of get people have a conversation. It become a not chaos, not a lot of fighting. And that's really like, if say the highest, like one of the higher level of the impact of product operations really is to say, hey, when my team get confused on what should we do, because there's some solution always work, but not at all scenarios, all times. And this is really like, not that we set strategy as product ops, we don't, but we help people to see and to discuss and to communicate strategy in a way that's understood, that's aligned, and that truly empower your team. You say, these are the 5 problems, help us to solve it. They can come up with, maybe none of the 300 items, maybe 10 out of them, I don't know. But if you don't say these are the 5 problems, nobody can agree on anything, it's chaos. So then we fail, right? We can, we fail. Like chaos is the antithesis of the product ops, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, my tagline in LinkedIn is chaotic good product manager. So I don't know if I 100% agree with you about chaos, but
when I say chaos, it's more around misalignment chaos, not like
alignment is costly, right? Like, I mean, I think that's the thing, is alignment is always a high cost to every organization.
Right.
I mean, I do want to like focus in on one thing that I think is an interesting thing I've seen, right, is this discussion of like, how do we update the team and get them aligned around a strategy versus this idea of actually creation of strategy. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of like leaders that are not willing to make hard decisions that are out there. And so what they end up doing is not creating the strategy. And exactly. I do see some problems with like product ops people being the ones that are like, well, we have to create the strategy, when the reality is like, it is actually the leader's job to do the strategy.
Right, exactly.
Right? And actually every PM right. should do strategy, right?
Right.
And so I think that you're absolutely right, that it's like, how do we communicate it? How do we get alignment? What is the process by which we discuss and have the right types of like arguments about the strategy? Right?
How do we make
That
sure
has to be a
strategy
part of it.
actually happen?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, at the different level, there's different level strategy, but the first things, like you said, right, is that, you know, it's a hard to create a strategy, it's a hard to agree on what problem we try to focus on. And if we just delegate that to teams and say, okay, you guys are empowered, that's bad, right? So the goal of product ops, not only you have to, you know, empower your team, enable your team, one of the key things is to make sure the strategic discussion and the uncomfortable discussion happens. And that also has to, that's sort of basically the responsibility for leaders and executives, right? So you know, what we're focusing on and what are the resources and the organization power behind it. You can't say, we're gonna do this 5 thing and you guys figure out how to make it done. No, we still have to have the conversation to say, what does it take to do these 5 things, like achieve these 5 goals, right? What does it take? And it's never comfortable. I mean, obviously PayPal is one of them. I think even at Amazon, right? So you have this, like, you know, you have these initiative process where you have to figure out where, you know, where are the goals, what are the top, you know, 5, 10, whatever areas to focus on, and what do they need to achieve this? Sometimes it's to get resources and you know, roadmaps from the other team. It's not a comfortable conversation, but if it doesn't happen, you can't achieve the goal. Your team is not gonna feel empowered if they need someone else's resources to support them. They feel powerless. So, and that's sort of our observation, is that a lot of organizations say, you have empowered team, I give you, you know, you have Scrum teams and whatnot, these are your goals. And the team don't feel empowered. Every day they can make progress because I depend on this team, I depend on this team, I depend on this team, and none of them is on their priority list. And every day I spend my time just trying to begging. And, you know, I think about 10 years ago, I was talking to one PMs at one of the events, and she was almost crying, say, what do? I couldn't ship anything. My stakeholders wants this, and I see our customer failing, but my roadmap items is not being prioritized by the 16 teams I'm relying on. Like, what do I do? Like, I don't want to do product managers anymore. It's just too stressful. And that's not what we want to happen, right? So product ops need to observe that and understand that, really enable your PMs to truly be empowered. That means a difficult conversation sometimes with leaders, right? It's not just setting strategy. What do they have to achieve?
And I think that leads to a couple questions from the audience that I can just answer or ask out for you guys. So one came in from Shannon Boone. So there's a lot of things for the product ops group to tackle. Where do you start, and what categories of things fall into the product ops classification? Hugo, you want to jump in and give that one a go?
I'm going to use that that term that's been used 100 times by everyone. It depends. It's that simple, because what happens is each organization you join, you'll find something completely different, right? So some organizations are really good at strategy building, others are really good at user research, others are really good at connecting the dots and, you know, reducing silos. The thing is, you have to get context. So I would say the first step is getting context, getting to understand, you know, starting to identify. And that's one of the things that's funny. I just joined a new job, right? And one of the things I was doing was, as I was having these intro calls, I would just take notes in a Miro board and start throwing down these things I was noticing. And I was like, oh, I have to dig into this one. I have to understand that one. And you start painting this picture, and then you start seeing these patterns arising from there. And from there, you then have to look and say, okay, where can we go from here? And then you have to start looking at what you have to look at. I also think it's important to spotlight, and I get this from the book Switch. I don't know if anybody's read it, by Dan and Chip Heath. And it's great because the whole focus there is around doing changes, but focusing on spotlighting the good, right? So you find these really great points of things working really well, and you grab that and say, how can I scale that out? Because what happens is, it's not our responsibility. You can almost pass that responsibility on to that person who's doing it well. And sometimes it's about doing that, right? And connecting people to people who are doing it well in the beginning, while you're still getting that context and everything. And then as we go, obviously you start identifying these things, and then you start making these changes. And I think it was like Chris was saying, you'd make these changes, and then you have to see what is the impact in the rest of the funnel, right? And the rest of the work and the rest of, before you can go on to the next thing. Because if you do it too soon, you know, it's going to become a mess. And so you have to see, hold on, did it affect it positively, negatively? And then so you go back and then you start building these out, and it's iterative. So we're basically working on an internal product, if you want to call it that, right?
Exactly.
It's continuously, iteratively.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. It's a discovery, right? So you start with a discovery, what are the things that are good, what are the things that are burning, what are the things that need to be fixed. And then you have your product ops backlog in terms of understanding. You do user research with all functions. And then what is there, like every organization is different. I totally agree with you. Some organization like having they have program management function that's doing really well. We pass these things for them because they own it. You have a data analytics teams and they can go get it, just have them more plugged in. So product ops, like you, I think I heard this multiple times. I think it probably from both of you as well on, being the product managers of running a product organization. So you find out what's working, what is not working, where we need to improve on, and then you continue to iterate on things and finding different results and measure it.
Any other classifications you'd throw in there, Chris?
No, I mean, I think the user research is really important, and that is like a key component, I think, of this. I mean, what I'm trying to think about is like, how do we get user researchers more involved with actual internal research? Because I think there's like a lot of value in that. But I think, the idea of contextualizing it with your own work is one where, I mean, Jared Spool constantly talks about how people shouldn't make product decisions unless they spend at least 3 hours every 6 weeks with a customer. And so I'd argue that a product ops person, it probably is even more than that, right? Like you should be talking to product people. Like if you don't talk to a product person every day, you're probably not doing your job as a product ops person. So I think that is most important, and really understanding where there's pain, right, is the part that is good. I mean, I like what you're saying as far as like the idea of switch, right, where you're trying to highlight the things that are working. I think there's something interesting about like, do we go after the parts of pain where we're trying to fix that? But we also are now like amping up the things that are really great. I think that's like an interesting dichotomy that I haven't thought about as much. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, that's exactly a great point. Hold on, I was going to say something and I lost my train of thought. Forget about it, Chris. Go ahead.
No, but I agree with you. I mean, I think it is valuable, right? But, yeah.
I'll pivot to a couple other questions, and if it comes back to you, Hugo, jump in. So we've had a couple questions around resourcing and kind of team structure. Bill asked, you can state that product ops should be a consideration for any company regardless of size. How have you seen a pattern to when companies start creating the product ops discipline? And then I'm also going to throw in there one from Arthur around what are some ways to determine when capacity, headcount, for example, needs to increase? So like, is there a trigger of when to start? And then at what point do you expand and grow?
I'm going to let someone else go first this time.
I mean, one thing I would just say here is I think this is related to the concept of just when we talk about resourcing, right? Like it's usually where our bet's going to be that we think is most valuable for us to focus on. So I think product ops is always going to be, I think, understaffed based on the duty that it has to perform in some way. But it also makes us, I think, in some way scrappier, or will help us focus on kind of smaller interventions that are more likely to be longer term gains. And so I think as a product ops person, you're going to be overloaded with way too many things. And so being very strict about how you prioritize is very important. I've found it really hard to actually delegate things as a product ops person, because I think for me as well, I like, especially when it comes to enablement or opinions about like certain types of training, I think I need to do personally a better job of delegating some of that stuff personally. So I think maybe that's more like my own issue, right, when it comes to the way I want these types of things to work. But I think it is really, really valuable that if you embrace this idea of an experimentation mindset, adding more people that are willing to experiment in more cases is probably very valuable. The problem is that like, when does churn from an experimentation standpoint become overburdensome for your product organization? And so I think that's like the counterbalance that we need to pull into this, is that I think product ops should be incredibly experiment driven, but I think if you do too many of these things, people will feel like their organization is constantly changing out from underneath them. So I think it's like, yeah, it's a really tough one. I definitely would love to hear what what everybody else thinks too, but that's what the part that I've been struggling with is like, it's okay to be overloaded because we just need to prioritize, I think is the way that I think about it.
Yeah, I think definitely there's part of the job is it's very people and high touch, and then part of the job can totally be automated. And sometimes I've seen product ops people just become a very administrative and making numbers and putting spreadsheets and putting slide decks, and those are not great. I have a couple of examples of sort of the resources that people know when the one of the company at work, I was help them building the first product organization before I joined. There was no product managers, just engineers and professional services project managers. And when we started building product organization, we started to have when you have a 4, 5, 6 product managers, then we were almost 80-20 rules, 20% of the time starting to do things that can really be centralized to be something more efficient and automated or standardized and so on. So at about 5 p.m. level, we start introduce the first product operations person, so that person can help to run various cadences, interact with the teams, so that we make sure the whole product organization run as internally well and across functionally well. But the funny thing is that we didn't proportionally linearly increase from 10 people to have 2 product ops. But the whole role about ops is about the efficiency, right? So, and you can see when the product organization get bigger, your product ops to product manager ratio has to go smaller. It's not like every 5 people, because that make that role is definitely not efficiently run. And that's really some of them is to prioritize what you can do, and some of them is to finding the right owner. For example, if you say, hey, product manager onboarding and training coaching, that should go to, by the time you have 20 product managers, you probably have an HR organization and a learning organization or some other partners to really outsource most of them. And for you, understanding where we are in terms of training, where the PMs, the feelings about that, and you can then drive programs being led by someone else. So it's very interesting to see there's a somewhat of an interesting ratio, even at PayPal, it's a bigger organization. I want to use PayPal because it's a bigger organization. I have a lot more data points to say over the years. What we're seeing is that the ratio of PMs to product ops, it just gets bigger, more PMs and less number of product ops. In the end, we have 300-400 PMs, and then we have 5 product ops. Right. And because there are a lot of other functions take on the roles, then that's more better suited for that function. And that's a force modifiers product ops, right? So I think that's something I would say is if your product manager spending more than 20% of their time to do things that kind of consistent from team to team, this time product ops have to come in to see is it something can be standardized, can be systematized, it can be taken away. If product ops do the same thing, right? If you're more than 20% of the time of multiple product ops doing the same, then you say, okay, so we should find a system or tooling or another party that better to standardize that part and componentize that business service API to somewhere else.
Maybe one thing I would just add here too is I do think that having the product community or community of practice do some of the standardization is also very valuable. So when we talk about this, we've been experimenting with this idea of a playbook which allows for topic mobbing with regards to PM. So I need help with road mapping. Who is interested in talking about road mapping?
Right.
I think if the product ops people are always the ones that are just answering that question, that's not a community, right? That's a power structure. So I don't know. I think that's the part that I also struggle with is it should actually be the community that's also building things for the community. But where is that line, I guess, is a tough thing that we haven't figured out yet.
Right.
Yeah, in my case, when we were at Farfetch, we found that the problem was, and that's when the org starts getting really big, is that you have some that are working at the level of leadership, right, of the product leadership, and then you have others that need to be at a product manager level, and you can't be across both, right, because you're constantly jumping between, oh, this is tactical and this is high level, and it gets very confusing. So that's when we felt the team needed to grow. But for example, the OutSystems team is a great example. What they did was they wanted to create a training program for the PMs, right, and they wanted to create this whole program to build up the capabilities of the product management team. And what they did was they hired a person who their focus is that, right? And so that's the thing. Sometimes it's around identifying people for key moments or key things that need to be structured in there. But, again, and like you're saying, Becky, I agree. Our ratio tends to, start widening as we go. But I think it's also normal because ideally, if we're doing our product work properly,
Right.
we should have less interventions, right?
Exactly.
So the underlying infrastructure should be there. The
Right.
baseline should be there. We should
Right.
actually make ourselves redundant,
Right.
which
Exactly.
I like to say, we're
Yeah,
working
it
to
is.
make ourselves redundant to a point.
Yeah.
It's not an easy option because it depends on the team. It depends on the company. Like, for example, sometimes you'll go into a company and design ops isn't needed because the design team does their ops really, really well. But the product team is terrible at it. Then you need product ops, right? And vice versa. It'll all depend. There are teams that are doing it really, really well, and they can squeeze it into the middle work. And then you'll find that other teams who are just losing control, and they need someone to help them take control of things a bit. So it does take it. You have to choose. You just have to choose which is the best option, I guess.
Right. One of the things I would say add on to it is like, we should also look at analogies. And the thing that I found out the most similar is the sales ops. If you look at sales ops and the product ops, in many ways, very, very similar. How, the ratios, the focus, and it's really evolving depending on the competencies, the system tooling in place, and the needs, of the organization. So it's always good to find similarity in a different realm and apply to our current practice, right?
Well, again, if you have one person, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say we're at time. We have a number of questions that we didn't get a chance to answer. We have all your names and contact info from your signing up. So we'll follow up and we'll answer those one-to-one. There were a number of requests on different resources, books, Slack, communities. So we'll send that in the follow-up email. I'd love to hear from the speakers. Just one last kind of tidbit as the topic was going into 2022. Any advice you have for product operations? Kind of parting words?
Enjoy it. It's probably one of the most challenging and fun things in the world, because it's constantly learning, constantly challenging, and you're constantly evolving. It's the type of thing where what you learn today, even in this last 2 months of just joining a new company, I've rethought a whole bunch of things that I thought, oh no, I'm pretty comfortable with these things, So it's always challenging your thought process and the way you approach things, and the way to solve them. So yeah, that's for me.
I mean, for me, I think just finding the right communities to get help as well, either internally, like if you're in a very large organization, there are probably other product ops people, but also I think externally, I think is really valuable, just because I think learning from other people, this is one of those things where product managers need to be really great about, figuring out which frameworks to use or processes or techniques. I think product ops people need to be even more knowledgeable about that, because we need to be able to work with the team to figure out what are the right ways to do things, or what are ways that could work here. And so I've found that to be very valuable through community discussions, through reading of community content, things like that. So that to me, I think is something that everybody should be doing if they're not already part of it. And so that's what I would say.
That's cool. I would just say, I really like, Hugo, you kind of like, hey, you take the best part, impressive part. I think the other things maybe not as exciting, but I think as a product ops, I always ask myself through my career, is that how do I make myself fire myself? How to get myself out of this thing, whatever that is. When I can get myself out of this thing, I can get onto the other thing that's more impactful or better. So I think when we approach our roles, to think about it, how do we replace my current self? That for you and for your organization's success.
For sure. Yeah.
Wonderful. We should have scheduled more time for this. Great conversation, great discussion between all of you. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks for the great questions, and to the panelists, thank you all for bringing your perspectives and insights.
Yeah, thanks. And it was great.
We should talk again.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, part 2. Love it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.